Imagine the Earth as it appeared nearly 200,000 years ago, a world both familiar and completely different from the one we know today. There were no glowing lights scattered across the night horizon. No cities shining like constellations on the surface of the planet. When darkness came, it truly came. The night sky was deep and immense, filled with stars brighter than most modern people have ever seen. There were no roads cutting through forests. No highways stretching across continents. No distant hum of engines or machines vibrating through the air. Silence ruled the landscape, broken only by the sounds of wind, water, and animals moving through the wilderness. The planet was vast, wild, and almost entirely untouched by human hands. Across great regions of the Earth, forests stretched endlessly, thick and ancient, filled with towering trees that had stood for centuries. Sunlight filtered through their leaves, casting moving shadows across the forest floor. In other places, enormous grasslands rolled outward in every direction beneath wide and open skies, where herds of animals traveled slowly across the land in search of food. Far to the north, glaciers crept steadily across entire continents. These immense rivers of ice moved so slowly that their progress could hardly be noticed in a single lifetime. Yet over thousands of years, they carved valleys into mountains and reshaped the land beneath them. Rivers flowed freely across the earth, wild and unrestrained. They twisted through forests and plains, cutting deep valleys that would remain unchanged for tens of thousands of years. There were no dams, no bridges, no cities along their banks, only water moving endlessly toward distant oceans. And somewhere within this vast wilderness, humans existed. But they were few. Very few. In fact, some scientists believe that the entire human population of Earth at that time may have numbered only 10 to 20,000 individuals. To put that into perspective, many modern towns contain far more people than that. All of humanity, every man, woman, and child, scattered across enormous stretches of the African landscape. They did not live in cities or villages. Instead, they lived in small groups, tiny tribes that traveled together through the land. Each tribe may have contained only 20 to 40 individuals, a handful of families, parents and children, elders who carried knowledge of the land, young hunters learning the skills they would need to survive. These groups moved constantly, wandering through forests, plains, and river valleys. They rarely stayed in one place for very long. A few days, perhaps a few weeks, sometimes a few months if food was plentiful. But eventually, they would move again, because in this ancient world, survival depended on movement. Food could disappear quickly. A grove of fruit trees might provide nourishment for a short time, but once the fruit was gone, the tribe would need to search elsewhere. Animals moved across the land in great migrations. Herds followed seasonal grasses, traveling hundreds of miles across the plains. To hunt successfully, humans often had to follow these migrations, walking vast distances through unfamiliar territory. Plants, too, appeared only during certain seasons. Berries ripened briefly before vanishing again for an entire year. Roots and edible plants could be found in some places but not others. And predators were always nearby. Lions stalked the grasslands. Leopards moved silently through trees. Hyenas roamed the night in large, powerful packs. To these animals, early humans were not the masters of the world. They were simply another creature sharing the same dangerous landscape. Life was not comfortable by modern standards. There were no houses to provide shelter from storms, no medicine to cure illness, no reliable food supply waiting on a store shelf. Cold nights, hunger, injury, and danger were constant companions. But life was not always miserable either. These early humans lived closely connected to the rhythms of the natural world. Their days followed the rising and setting of the sun. Their movements followed the seasons. Their knowledge of animals, plants, and landscapes grew deeper with every generation. Children learned by watching their elders. Stories were told beside fires beneath the stars. Knowledge was passed carefully from one person to another, ensuring that each new generation understood how to survive. In many ways, these early humans lived within a steady rhythm that would remain largely unchanged for nearly 200,000 years. Long before the rise of cities. Long before kings, armies, or written language. For most of human history, life moved at the slow pace of the natural world, guided by seasons, shaped by the land, and shared among small tribes wandering through an immense and silent earth. A typical day for early humans did not begin with alarms, schedules, or the glowing screens that wake many of us today. Instead, their day began quietly, slowly, with the rising of the sun. Long before clocks existed, the movement of light across the earth determined the rhythm of human life. As the horizon slowly brightened, the darkness of night began to retreat. The first pale colors of dawn spread across the sky, turning deep black into shades of blue and gold. Soft light crept gently across the landscape. Birds began their morning songs, small calls echoing through forests and across open plains. Insects stirred in the grass. The cool air carried the scent of earth, plants, and distant water. Within small human camps scattered across the wilderness, people began to wake. Not all at once. Gradually, a child might shift in their sleep. An elder might open their eyes and watch the growing light. Someone might quietly rise to add a branch to the fire if it was still burning. The tribe slowly stirred from sleep as the new day arrived. These early humans did not live in permanent homes. There were no villages filled with houses, no wooden doors to close against the night. Instead, they slept wherever the land offered protection and safety. Sometimes this meant resting beneath rocky overhangs, where large stones formed natural shelters against wind and rain. These places provided shade during the day and some protection during the night. Other times, tribes slept inside shallow caves. Such caves were not always deep or comfortable, but they could shield people from harsh weather and offer a defensible place against predators. And sometimes, when no shelter was nearby, people slept in the open landscape itself, gathered together on the ground beneath the wide sky. A fire, if they had one, burned at the center of the group. Sleep during these ancient times was very different from the deep, uninterrupted sleep many people enjoy today. It was lighter, more alert, because the night was dangerous. Once darkness fell, the world belonged to other creatures. Lions moved silently through the grasslands, their powerful bodies nearly invisible beneath the moonlight. Hyenas traveled in noisy packs, their strange calls echoing across the plains. Leopards climbed trees and stalked quietly through the darkness. Even smaller dangers existed. Venomous snakes hidden in the grass. Scorpions beneath stones. Creatures that could harm a sleeping human with a single bite or sting. In this ancient world, humans were not yet the unquestioned rulers of the planet. Many animals did not see them as dominant beings. They saw them as potential prey. This constant danger meant that early humans often slept with caution. Someone in the group might remain awake for part of the night, watching the darkness beyond the firelight. The crackling of flames helped. The discovery of controlled fire may have been one of the most important moments in all of human history. Fire changed everything. It brought warmth during cold nights. It frightened away many predators who preferred to stay far from the flickering light and heat. It allowed food to be cooked, making many plants and meats easier to digest. But fire offered something even more powerful than warmth or protection. It gave humans light. Light that pushed back the darkness. Light that extended the day beyond sunset. Around a fire, people could gather together after the sun had disappeared below the horizon. They could talk, share stories, teach children, and strengthen the bonds that held their small tribes together. In a world without artificial light, the glow of a fire must have felt extraordinary. A small sun on the ground. A circle of warmth and brightness in an otherwise dark and unpredictable world. Yet during the earliest periods of human history, fire was not always easy to maintain. Many tribes did not yet know how to create fire whenever they wished. Instead, they often depended on natural fires that began through powerful forces of nature. Lightning might strike a dry tree during a storm, setting it ablaze. Grasslands might catch fire during periods of intense heat. Volcanic activity in distant regions could send sparks and burning debris into the landscape. When early humans encountered such fires, they sometimes captured small burning branches and carried them back to their camps. From that moment on, their survival depended on keeping the flame alive. The fire had to be carefully protected. Branches and dry wood needed to be added regularly so that the flame would not fade. If the fire died completely, the tribe might lose its only source of controlled flame, and finding a new one could take days, weeks, or even longer. For this reason, fire was not simply a useful tool. It was something precious, something fragile, a living presence that required attention and care. Around these fires, early humans slept, talked, and watched the darkness beyond the circle of light, knowing that beyond the glow of the flames, the ancient wilderness was always waiting. Once the morning light had fully spread across the land, the tribe would begin the most important task of the day: finding food. In the ancient world, survival depended on this simple but constant responsibility. There were no stored supplies waiting in containers, no farms producing predictable harvests, and no markets where food could be exchanged. Every meal had to be discovered somewhere in the landscape. Humans at this stage of history lived as hunter-gatherers, a way of life that would define humanity for the vast majority of its existence. Being a hunter-gatherer meant that survival depended on two main activities: hunting animals and gathering wild plants. Both were equally important, though modern imagination often focuses only on the hunt. In reality, much of the tribe's daily nutrition likely came from the work of gathering. As the morning continued, groups of people, often women, children, and sometimes men, would spread out across the surrounding land in search of edible plants. They searched for berries hanging from shrubs, nuts hidden among fallen leaves, and roots buried beneath the soil. Some plants could be eaten immediately, while others required knowledge and preparation. Finding these foods required remarkable awareness of the environment. Early humans had to know which plants were safe to eat and which ones were dangerous. Some berries might nourish the body, while others could cause sickness or even death. This knowledge was not written down in books. It existed only in memory, passed carefully from elders to younger generations through observation and experience. Children learned by watching. They followed older members of the tribe, observing which plants were gathered and how they were prepared. Over time, they came to recognize the shapes of leaves, the colors of ripe fruit, and the locations where certain plants grew best. This gathering work may have provided the majority of the tribe's daily calories. It was steady and dependable, offering a variety of foods that could be found throughout different seasons. Meanwhile, separate groups sometimes prepared for a much more uncertain task: hunting. Small hunting parties would leave the camp, moving quietly into the surrounding landscape in search of animals. The goal was meat, a valuable source of energy and nutrients. But hunting was never easy. Early humans did not yet possess many of the tools that later civilizations would invent. There were no bows to send arrows across long distances, no metal blades or strong weapons forged in fire. Instead, their tools were simple and carefully crafted from the materials around them. Sharpened wooden spears were among the most common hunting weapons. These spears were often hardened in fire to make their tips stronger. Stone tools were also widely used. Early humans learned to shape stones into sharp edges by striking them carefully with other rocks. These tools could be used for cutting, scraping, and sometimes for helping to finish a hunt. In some cases, hunters carried hand axes, heavy, teardrop-shaped stones carefully chipped into sharp forms. These tools were remarkably durable and may have served many purposes, from cutting meat to breaking bones. But tools alone were not enough. Hunting required patience, cooperation, and extraordinary endurance. Animals in the wild were fast, alert, and deeply familiar with their environments. A single mistake could allow a prey animal to escape into the distance. Because of this, hunters sometimes followed animals for hours, and sometimes for entire days. One of the most remarkable advantages early humans possessed was their ability to travel long distances without tiring. Unlike many animals, the human body is built for endurance. Our legs are long and efficient. Our bodies cool themselves through sweat, allowing us to remain active even in warm temperatures. These adaptations allowed early humans to practice a hunting method that few other predators could achieve. It is known today as persistence hunting. Instead of chasing animals in quick bursts of speed, humans could simply continue moving. Slowly, steadily, relentlessly. An antelope or similar animal might run quickly at first, easily escaping the initial approach of hunters. But humans could follow the animal's tracks across the land, maintaining a steady pace as the animal attempted to flee again and again. Over time, the animal would begin to tire. Unlike humans, many animals cool their bodies through panting rather than sweating. After long periods of running under the sun, their bodies would begin to overheat. Eventually, the animal might slow, then stumble, finally collapsing from exhaustion. Only then would the hunters carefully approach. Even with such strategies, successful hunts did not happen every day. Some hunts ended with empty hands and long walks back to camp. Sometimes tribes went many days without catching large animals. For this reason, the gathering of plants remained essential. Roots, berries, nuts, and other wild foods provided a steady source of nourishment when hunting was unsuccessful. Together, these two activities, hunting and gathering, formed the foundation of human survival for tens of thousands of years. Every day began with the same quiet challenge: to search the land, to read the signs of animals and plants, and to find enough food to carry the tribe safely into another night. One of the most defining features of these ancient humans was their constant movement. Unlike the societies we know today, they did not build cities. There were no walls, no streets, no permanent homes rising from the earth. The idea of staying in one place for generations had not yet become part of human life. They also did not plant crops. Farming, which would one day transform the world and give rise to villages and civilizations, had not yet been discovered. Early humans lived entirely from what the land provided naturally. Instead of shaping the landscape, they followed it. Their lives moved with the rhythms of the natural world. When food became scarce in one area, they moved somewhere else. When animals migrated across the plains in search of fresh grass, humans followed their tracks. When seasons changed and certain plants disappeared, tribes traveled to regions where new food sources could be found. This constant movement was not a choice made out of curiosity or adventure. It was a necessity for survival. The natural world was unpredictable. A valley that provided abundant food one season might become barren the next. Rivers could dry or change course. Herds of animals might travel hundreds of miles away, leaving the land empty and quiet. To survive, humans had to remain flexible. They had to watch the land carefully, noticing subtle changes in the environment around them. A tribe might settle temporarily in a place that offered water, shelter, and nearby food sources. Perhaps a river valley where fish could be caught and plants grew in abundance. Or a region where herds of grazing animals often passed through. For a short time, life might feel stable. Children would play nearby. Adults would gather food and repair tools. The group might sleep in the same location for many nights, becoming familiar with the sounds and shapes of the surrounding landscape. But eventually, something would change. The berries would stop growing. The animals would move on. The water source might shrink or disappear. And so the tribe would prepare to leave. Packing was simple because early humans owned very little. Everything they possessed had to be carried by hand as they walked across the land. Their belongings might include stone tools carefully shaped for cutting or scraping, spears used for hunting, simple containers made from natural materials, perhaps animal skins used for warmth. Most possessions were practical and lightweight. There was no furniture, no heavy structures, nothing that tied them permanently to one place. When the time came to move, the entire tribe would begin walking again. Adults carried tools and supplies. Children followed beside them or were carried when they grew tired. The group moved slowly but steadily across the landscape, searching for the next place where life could continue. Sometimes these journeys were short, only a few miles to a new valley or water source. Other times, the movement lasted far longer. Tribes might travel across wide plains, through forests, along river systems, or across rocky hills. Over generations, these movements slowly expanded human presence across vast regions. It was through this wandering way of life that humans eventually spread beyond their earliest homelands. But at the time, each journey was simply another step in the endless rhythm of survival. This wandering lifestyle continued for an astonishing length of time, nearly 190,000 years. To understand how long that truly is, it helps to compare it with the history most people learn about in school. The entire age of civilization, from the first farming villages to modern cities, covers only about 10,000 years. The pyramids of Egypt are about 4,500 years old. The rise and fall of ancient kingdoms and empires, Egypt, Greece, Rome, Persia, and many others, together fill only a small portion of human history. Yet the wandering age of humanity lasted far longer than all of these combined. For nearly 200,000 years, human life followed the same essential pattern. Small tribes, endless landscapes, constant movement guided by the needs of survival. Generation after generation lived this way, adapting to the land, learning its secrets, and passing their knowledge forward. In that immense stretch of time, the Earth itself slowly changed. Ice ages advanced and retreated. Forests expanded and shrank. Animals evolved, migrated, and sometimes disappeared. But the human way of life remained remarkably consistent. For most of our species' existence, people were not builders of cities or rulers of empires. They were travelers, wanderers, observers of the land. For them, movement was not an occasional journey. It was life itself. To remain still for too long was to risk hunger, danger, and uncertainty. But to move was to follow the ancient rhythms of the earth, rhythms that had guided human survival since the very beginning of our story. As evening slowly approached, the rhythm of the day began to change. The sun, which had spent hours climbing across the wide sky, now drifted gently toward the horizon. Its light softened, turning from bright white into warm shades of gold and orange. Long shadows stretched across the land as the day quietly prepared to give way to night. The temperature began to cool. The intense heat of the afternoon faded, replaced by a softer evening air that carried the scent of grass, earth, and distant water. Birds that had been active during the day gradually quieted, while other creatures began to stir in the growing darkness. Across the landscape, small groups of humans slowly made their way back toward their temporary camp. Those who had spent the day gathering plants returned with whatever they had found: berries, roots, nuts, or edible leaves carefully carried in simple containers or wrapped in animal skins. Hunters, if they had been successful, might return carrying pieces of meat or animal bones that would later be used for tools. Children who had spent the day near camp would watch eagerly as the others returned, curious to see what the tribe had discovered that day. Gradually, the entire group gathered together once again. The sun slipped fully below the horizon. Darkness spread steadily across the land. Without artificial light, the arrival of night was far more dramatic than it is today. Within a short time, the entire world could become almost completely dark, illuminated only by the moon and stars above. If the tribe had managed to keep their fire alive, it quickly became the center of the evening. People gathered around it in a loose circle. The firelight flickered against nearby rocks, trees, or cave walls, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. Sparks rose into the air and disappeared into the darkness above. The warmth of the fire felt comforting after the cooling air of evening. And perhaps most importantly, the fire created a small island of safety within the vast and uncertain night. Beyond the reach of the flames, the wilderness continued to move. Animals roamed the darkness. Predators hunted silently through the grasslands and forests. But within the circle of firelight, the tribe could relax for a while. This time around the fire may have been the most important social moment of the entire day. For much of the daylight hours, people had been spread across the landscape searching for food or tracking animals. Evening brought everyone back together again. It was a time to talk, a time to share the events of the day. Hunters might describe the animals they had seen or the paths herds were taking across the land. Gatherers might explain where certain plants were growing or warn others about dangerous foods they had discovered. Children listened carefully to these conversations. This was how knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. Long before writing existed, information survived only through memory and storytelling. Stories played a powerful role in these ancient communities. Around the fire, elders may have told stories about past hunts, dangerous encounters with animals, or journeys through unfamiliar lands. Some stories likely explain the natural world, why certain animals behaved the way they did, or why the seasons changed throughout the year. Other stories may have carried deeper meanings, helping younger members of the tribe understand their place within the group and the wider world. Through these conversations and stories, young people slowly learned the skills they would need to survive. They learned how to recognize animal tracks, how to find water in dry landscapes, how to tell which plants were safe to eat. They learned how to read the sky, understanding the movements of the stars that slowly crossed the night above them. Many early humans likely developed a deep awareness of the heavens. Without artificial lights blocking the view, the night sky must have appeared breathtakingly clear. Thousands of stars filled the darkness, forming patterns that repeated night after night and season after season. These patterns may have helped tribes understand time, direction, and the changing cycles of nature. We sometimes imagine that early humans lived simple lives, but their minds were already remarkably complex. They possessed an intricate understanding of the world around them. They understood the behavior of animals, which ones were dangerous, which ones could be hunted, and how they moved across the landscape. They understood weather patterns, learning to recognize signs of approaching storms or changing seasons. They understood plants, which ones healed injuries, which ones nourished the body, and which ones must be avoided. And they understood the land itself. Every valley, river, and mountain could hold valuable knowledge. Every piece of information mattered, because survival depended on it. A single mistake could lead to hunger, illness, or danger, but careful observation and shared wisdom could keep the tribe safe. And so, night after night, generation after generation, knowledge slowly accumulated. Through countless evenings around fires, stories were told, lessons were repeated, and memories were passed forward. Over thousands upon thousands of years, these shared experiences slowly shaped something new. Human culture, a growing web of knowledge, traditions, and understanding that would one day help humans build villages, cities, and civilizations. But in those distant evenings long ago, it all began in a far simpler setting. A small group of people, a flickering fire, and stories carried gently into the night beneath a sky full of ancient stars. For nearly 190,000 years, humanity lived in this way. Small tribes moving across vast landscapes. Fires glowing softly in the darkness. Children slowly learning the skills of survival from the people around them. For generation after generation, life followed this quiet rhythm. Days were shaped by the rising of the sun and the search for food. Nights were shaped by the warmth of fire and the stories shared beneath the stars. It is difficult for us today to fully imagine how long this period truly lasted. Nearly 200,000 years. To place this into perspective, everything we call civilization, cities, kingdoms, empires, writing, and recorded history occupies only a tiny fraction of the human timeline. For the overwhelming majority of our species' existence, humans lived not in crowded cities or permanent homes, but in small wandering groups spread across immense and mostly untouched landscapes. The Earth itself changed slowly during those long ages. Ice ages advanced and retreated across the northern continents. Massive glaciers expanded across mountains and valleys, then slowly melted away again as climates shifted. Forests grew thicker in some regions and disappeared in others. Vast grasslands appeared where forests once stood. In certain areas, deserts slowly expanded, transforming green land into dry and silent plains of sand and stone. Rivers shifted their paths across the land, carving new valleys and leaving old ones behind. Entire ecosystems changed over thousands of years, altering the plants and animals that humans depended upon for survival. Yet through all these enormous changes in the natural world, the basic pattern of human life remained surprisingly consistent. Small groups, constant movement, careful observation of the land. Knowledge passed from elders to children. The essential skills of survival, finding food, avoiding danger, reading the seasons, were taught again and again, generation after generation. Children who were born into these tribes grew up watching the adults around them. They learned which animals could be hunted and which ones should be avoided. They learned the taste of safe plants and the dangers of poisonous ones. They learned how to travel long distances across unfamiliar landscapes, guided only by memory, observation, and the position of the sun and stars. Life did not stand still, but it also did not change rapidly. For thousands of generations, humanity existed in a state of remarkable balance with the natural world. Humans were intelligent, adaptable, and skilled, but they were still only one species among many others living on the planet. They were not yet builders of cities. They were not rulers of great kingdoms. They were travelers moving through forests, plains, and mountains, surviving through knowledge, cooperation, and persistence. But eventually, something extraordinary began to happen. Around 12,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age, a transformation quietly began that would alter the course of human history forever. In several regions of the world, humans started to experiment with a completely new idea. Instead of constantly moving across the land in search of food, they began to stay in one place. They began to plant seeds. They began to grow food themselves. This discovery, the beginning of farming, was one of the most important turning points in the entire story of humanity. For the first time, people could produce their own reliable food supply. Fields of crops could be harvested year after year. Animals could be raised and kept close to human communities. With farming came the new possibility. People no longer needed to move constantly in search of food. They could remain in one place. Small farming communities began to appear, the first villages. Over time, these villages grew larger. More people gathered together. New tools were invented. Specialized jobs began to emerge. Some people farmed. Others built tools. Others created art, traded goods, or organized communities. Eventually, villages expanded into towns. Towns expanded into cities. And with cities came something humanity had never experienced before: civilization. Complex societies with laws, governments, trade networks, and written languages began to develop. Over thousands of years, these civilizations would give rise to the great kingdoms and empires that fill our history books. But all of that came much later. Tonight, we remember the far longer chapter that came before. The ancient world that existed long before cities rose from the earth. A world where humans did not dominate the planet, but instead lived carefully within it. A world of small fires burning in the night, of endless landscapes stretching beyond the horizon, of children learning the ancient knowledge of survival beneath open skies. A time when humanity was not yet the master of the earth, but simply another creature trying to survive beneath the vast, quiet, and endless sky.